Okay, this is a teaching video for my introductory Greek class, utilizing in conjunction with um, Gerald Stevens' New Testament Greek Primer. And I'm going to be covering in this video chapters 2 and 3. So after our first class the other day, I conversed with a couple of you and got some emails from you that, and a couple of you indicated that it was you were struggling a little bit with chapters 2 and 3 and just having some trouble understanding it. And really, I didn't have enough time in the class to fully explain chapter 2 and 3. We kind of ran out of time at the end, and I tried to rush through it and really didn't feel good about it myself. So I thought I'll make a teaching video and just kind of walk you through chapters 2 and 3, and maybe some explanation, some further explanation will help you in understanding it and doing the exercise at the end of the chapter. So I won't touch on chapter 1 too much, as you recall, because I did cover that one pretty well in class. Chapter 1 was just about the alphabet, mainly pronunciation issues, diphthongs, things like that, and then accent marks and punctuation marks, things like that. So chapters 2 and 3 is where I'll really focus. In chapter 2 and 3 is all about introducing you to the Greek verb system. So there are let me say this, something I neglected to say in class. A couple of you had made mention of the fact that after starting to read through the textbook, this Greek textbook, you kind of ran into the realization that you hadn't done English grammar for a long time, and that makes it difficult to understand. In fact, at the very back of your book on page 443, and it really starts on page 445, there's an English appendix. Okay, there's an English appendix that walks you through issues of grammar, all kinds of some of the language of grammar and understanding of how the English language is formulated. In fact, when Dr. Stevens, who's the New Testament professor on campus, teaches this course, when I took this course, just like you're taking it now for the first time, he always starts every semester, and I think he spends something like 2, maybe even 3 classes just going through those chapters on page 445 and following those 5 chapters in the English appendix. Because one of the things he's told me before, and he says to all of his classes, is I realize that vast majority of my students, they come to class, they're starting to learn Greek, and they haven't done English grammar for a long time, maybe since grade school or high school. And so even though we use our primary language every day, we don't think of it in terms of through grammar categories. So for example, if I were to stop somebody on the street who's an English speaker and say, what's a participle? They probably wouldn't know, but they utilize it every day. They use participles in everyday speech, but they don't think about it through a grammar lens. That's going to, if you've been outside of English grammar for a while, that's going to make learning Greek difficult, because we're learning it here deductively, not inductively. And when you learn something deductively, you have to learn it through sort of a system of categories. You don't pick it up like, say, small children do as they learn to talk around the house when they're growing up. So we're learning it deductively, which means you've got to kind of know a little bit about English grammar to even get chapters 2 and 3 to kind of have a clue of what he's talking about. So I encourage you, take some time if you're really struggling with English grammar and you're struggling with understanding some of the grammar stuff in chapter 2 and 3. Take some time and go back and look at some of those chapters in the English appendix, especially the 3rd chapter in the English appendix, way back in the back of the book. Don't get that confused with chapter 3. When I say the 3rd chapter, I'm talking about in the appendix, English 3. It's entitled Sentences, and it's on page 465. And that'll help you out. So what I'm going to do, and I'll talk a little bit about that in this video. So what I'll do is, before getting into the Greek grammar of chapters 2 and 3, let me make some comments about grammar in general. Okay. So in these chapters, and when you start to learn the Greek verb system, one of the things Dr. Stevens is going to talk about is Greek principal parts. Okay, so you're going to hear that term a lot. What is a principal part? Well, in English, as he says in chapter 2, English has 3 principal parts to its verb system, and Greek has 6 principal parts. Principal parts is just a phrase that grammarians use to talk about how verbs are formulated. You have a verb like go, and what are the different ways that you formulate, what are the different forms of that verb in order to do what the things you need to do in that language to communicate. So in English, we have 3 principal parts. primarily three: present, past, and past participle. And these are different ways they're formed. So you say, for example, when we say in English, if you were teaching somebody English for the first time and it was they didn't know English and they're learning vocabulary words and they're learning that with in the English, the Greek verb system, a lot of times we'll put ed on the end of verbs to make them past tense. If they learn the word go, for example, and you say, okay, put that in past tense, they're going to want to do something like this, goed. And you can say, no, that's all wrong. We've got a different form of that word, and it's for past tense, and it's went. And if you're not an English speaker, you don't even get this. Like, how do you get from go to went? It's a completely different word. And so sometimes I always say English is a bit of a Frankenstein when it comes to its principal parts with how it forms verbs, because in cases like this with go to went, from present to past, we borrow from other languages, Latin and French and other languages. It's really a Frankenstein language. In some instances, we will conjugate our words. So if I have a word book and I'm teaching somebody English and I say to make that plural, you have to conjugate it. You have to add something to the word. You change the spelling of the word. We add an S. We say books, and it makes it plural. Notice what we're doing here is we're actually conjugating. We're actually changing the word. In this example, go to went, in the two different tenses here, and two different principal parts, we're actually, it's a completely different word. And so that's an example of conjugation and in its different forms in the English language. And so what happens is in the verb system, in any language, doesn't matter if you're talking Spanish, you're talking French, Greek, they have this language of principal parts, just a way to talk about how we take a verb and what are its different forms. Okay, so in English you have 3, in Greek you have 6 principal parts. And which makes Greek much, you say, well, so does English just not have those other principal parts? Well, no, it doesn't have those other principal parts in the way it forms verbs, but it communicates the same thing in other ways. So, for example, in English, we use auxiliary verbs. If we want to say put go in the future tense, we don't have a principal part for that. So what do? We say will. We actually add a word to the sentence. He will go, and then that puts the word go into the future. There's no principal. We're not changing the word go. You're adding an auxiliary word to it, and so it doesn't have a principal part for a future tense. You add auxiliary words in English. Well, in the Greek, it's a little bit more of a precise verb system. So they morph, as I said in class, they use morphology. They change the spelling of the word in order to indicate these different principal parts, which means you're going to have to not only memorize vocabulary, but a lot of formation patterns, a lot of endings, okay? And that is what chapters 2 and 3 are all about. It's a first formation pattern for the Greek verb system, the present tense, which is the first principal part. Okay, so we're going to learn the first principal part of the Greek verb system, and it's going to be present tense in the second and third chapter. Now, if you look at page 22, and I encourage you to have your book open so you can kind of follow along. Notice here, based on what I just told you, that Greek uses morphology and not word order. Let me say a point about that. In English, we have a system of word order to make sense of sentences. So we'll do a subject, a verb, and an object. And that's 1, 2, 3. And they're always in that order. Subject, verb, and object are always in that order, 1, 2, 3. If I say he, let me change that to a person's name. Let me say Bill hit the ball. If I make that simple sentence there, Bill hit the ball, Bill is the subject, and we know that because of its word order. Okay, it's in the subject slot. It comes before the verb, and the object comes after the verb. If I were to switch that around and say the ball hit Bill, notice I've completely changed the sense of the sentence by changing the word order, but the spelling doesn't change. Bill is still spelled the same. Ball is still spelled the same. I haven't changed it based on whether it's subject or object. And I could say Bill, and I can make this future and add a little will in there. Will hit the ball, making it future tense. Again, I haven't changed the verb, the spelling of the verb hit. I've used auxiliary words like will. I've used word order, first, second, third there, and it's the way the sentence is structured. In English, this is how we communicate. In Greek, they conjugate everything. So you can, in Greek, you can have the subject at the very end of the sentence. And you say, well, how will I know it's the subject? By the way it's spelled. The ending will be different. Subjects have a very specific ending. We'll learn that in a future chapter. So Greek uses, word order doesn't matter nearly as much for sentence sense. It's the spelling of the words, which is the point Stevens makes on page 22 in that little bullet point there in the middle of the page. You must focus on a Greek word spelling, not its order for sentence sense. And then he's going to explain principal parts in the English, and then in the Greek, you see on the bottom page 22, the 6 principal parts of the Greek verb system: present, future, aorist, perfect active, perfect middle, and then aorist passive. Now, sometimes you're going to have a tendency to want to think of the principal parts as tenses, but they're really not. It's a way verbs are formed in its various parts. But there are several tenses representing your present, future, but notice perfect active, perfect middle are 2 different principal parts. They're the same tense, perfect, but 2 different principal parts, and we'll learn that when we get to it. So that's what so that's the big picture of what principal parts are all about, and what verbs and what the Greek verb system is in its principal parts. Now, a couple other terms you need to be introduced to in order to understand this chapter and further chapters. One of the terms he's going to use a lot is this language of paradigm, and you see that on page 23, paradigm. What is a paradigm? A paradigm is a way we grammarians tend to formulate, drop something, the way they formulate their verbs, their endings, and they systematize learning for in a deductive manner for students. And so they put it like in a row or a paradigm, like you see at the bottom of page 23, to help the student learn or understand the various endings to a particular tense or whatever. So, for example, if you look on page 23 on page 2.1, you'll see one of the first paradigms you're being introduced to. And it looks a little something like this. Here's what's not on the page you kind of need to know. In this example, in the present active indicative, you have the stem, lu. I've only written the stem here, and it's written 6 times. The reason for that, hopefully you'll be able to see this blue, is the first 3 are singular. I'll just write SG for singular, and the second 3 are plural. Okay, hopefully, I don't know if you can see that, plural, PL. So the second 3 are plural, and the first 3 are singular, and they're just sort of lining them up so you can see the endings in the singular and the plural pattern. Now, I'll explain what each of those endings are in a second. Just know that the first 3 are singular, second 3 are plural in that paradigm. You're going to see this over and over again in every chapter. Now, one of the things you're going to have to do at the end of the exercises in chapter 2 and 3, you're going to do it this whole class over and over again, is you're going to be asked to locate something. I think he introduces this to you on page 25, top of page 25. What a grammarian is asking you to do when he asks you to locate is look at that Greek word or verb, in this case, in chapter 2 and 3, it's verbs, later on it'll be nouns, and look at the way it's spelled, and then locate its different parameters. Okay, there's another term, parameters. For verbs, when a grammarian or when he asks you to locate, he's asking you for parameters, and this is, again, on page 25. What he's basically asking you for is look at the word, give me the tense, give me the voice. They are listed in parentheses there. Give me the mood, give me the person, and give me the number. And then the last one, parameter, is called lexical. What lexical is the dictionary. Let me get out of the way here. It's the dictionary form, okay? You learn all vocabularies like you're learning a vocabulary list in a dictionary format. So when they say locate the verb or locate the noun, you'll do that later, but in this case, locate the verb, what they're asking you to do is give me the parameters of the verb. Every Greek verb has these parameters. It'll have a tense, a voice, a mood, a person, a number, and then its lexical vocabulary. Now, for example, lu or luo is going to be one of the most common ones you're going to learn about in Greek. It's going to be used over and over again because as a verb, some verbs are irregular, like in English, go to went. There's no rhyme or reason. It's borrowing from 2 different words. That sometimes happens in Greek, but lu, to loose, to loosen, it stays pretty stable through the Greek verb system. So grammarians, Mounce does it, Stevens does it, they'll all use this one as an example for your paradigm. So what he's given you on page 23 is the present active indicative endings in the singular and plural. So you have, and you'll see this on your chart on page 23 if you want to look there. Luo, lu ace, lu a, lu amen, lu ete, and lu usen. It's a diphthong there. And I'll put that little nu in parentheses. If you're wondering what this little n, or it looks like a V, but it's an N, a nu in parentheses, they call this a movable nu. And you should memorize it with the ending, but just know that there are times when it'll drop off depending on what follows the verb and for different reasons. So I kind of learned it as usen, and then if I don't see the n, I still recognize the ending. So kind of learn it with the n, but they put in parentheses to tell you it's a movable nu, and sometimes it'll drop out. So here is your primary active endings, okay? O, ace, a, amen, ete, usi. And if you were to say, and what's happening here is this is the stem, I put in black here, lu is your vocabulary stem, and then with its ending here. So lu o, lu ace, lu a, lu amen. It's an omicron, not an omega, so we'll want to say lu omen, but really it's lu amen. Lu ete, and lu usi, or usin, if you pronounce the n. Notice, this is a diphthong here, so that's like one vowel sound, the O-U together, the omicron, upsilon. So it's lu, u, sin, lu, usin, le, usin. It's technically le, usin, something like that. So that's that verb system. Now, let me explain this tense, voice, mood, person, number, and lexical. The lexical vocabulary that you're going to learn in your vocabulary list are always going to come in the form of the first person here, the one with the omega. Oh, and I should say this. So the way this is formulated in the paradigm, singular is the first three. This is always going to be first person in the way it's listed. This is second person. This is third person. And then you're going to get plural in the same thing. So first plural, second plural, and third plural. So what we mean by person, which is this parameter here, is I is first person plural. I'm sorry, first person singular is I. Second person singular is you, like one individual, you. Third person singular is he, she, or it. First plural would be what? We. We, not I, but we. First person plural is we. Second person plural, we don't have an English version of this. We say something like y'all, if you're from the South. So I would call it Southern Greek, y'all. And then they. Third person plural is they. So it's I loose, you loose as an individual, singular. He or she or it looses. You may say, well, how do I know it's he, she, or it? Because a can be a he, a she, or an it in gender. The only way to know is context. So when I look at this, it's he, she, or it. It could be any one of those three, lu a, but I won't know unless if it's masculine, feminine, or neuter, neuter, unless I look at the context. I have to see it in a context to know. And then we loose, you loose, but in the plural, you all loose, okay? And then they lose. By the way, isn't this neat? In Greek, you can't, in English, if someone says, let's say I'm standing in front of a classroom and I say, you open your book. You don't know if I'm talking to an individual in the classroom or the whole classroom. Okay, you have to kind of catch it from context, kind of figure it out. There's nothing in the sentence that indicates I'm talking to one individual or plural. If I say, you all open your book, notice I have to add the word all to make that you plural. And we don't do that all the time. A lot of times in English, I can look at a class and say, you open your book. And I mean everybody. And you just kind of catch it from context. But isn't this cool about Greek? Greek actually has separate spellings for singular and plural in the second person. So you'll know by the ending whether it's an individual person, singular you, or whether it's a plural you. This pattern follows through, and we'll find out in the pronouns as well. in the Greek language. So the Greek, again, here's the first example of a very precise kind of language when compared to English. You look at it, in other words, you're looking at your English Bible and you may see some commandment, you do this or you do that, and you don't know if it's singular or plural in the English when you're reading it. But if you know Greek and you look into the Greek, you're going to look at the ending of the verb and you're going to know right off the bat whether it's singular or plural. So when they ask for lexical, let me go back to this. When we ask for lexical and when you locate, lexical is always going to be this first person singular. That's just the way the vocabulary books, Greek vocabulary lexicons, always list the lexical form. It's always going to be luo, the root plus the first person singular there, luo. Okay, so you need to know lexical is the vocabulary word, okay, for the verb, and it's always given with the first person singular in the vocabulary. Okay, so that's what that is. So what is tense, voice, mood, person, number? These parameters, when you locate, what you're doing is looking at the word and then identifying each of these in the spelling. So right now it's not real complicated. You're only being introduced to one tense, present, and one mood, indicative. So all of these on this paradigm are going to be in tense. They're going to be present. You haven't learned anything else. Later when you learn aorist and perfect, you're going to find out that the spelling changes and you'll be able to look at that and go, oh, that's not a present tense, that's an aorist tense, or that's a perfect or whatever. In this case, you have just lu, which tells you present tense. You have voice is going to be active. Let me put it this way. Right now, you have, this is going to be present. Voice, you have one of three options. And this is true for every verb. You have active, you have middle, or you have passive. This is true for all voice. Active, middle, passive. Those are your three choices. Now, notice in chapter 2 and 3, you're learning two different endings for the voice. So for active, these are all active endings. Chapter 2 is present, active, indicative endings. All of these. So if I memorize my paradigm, o, es, a, amen, ete, usi, as active, present, active, indicative endings, then I know when I see this word and somebody says, locate this, oh, I know because I've memorized my paradigm, lu, amen. If I just see that and they say located, I know I've got a present, I've got an active because that's an active ending. Present, active, and then right now you're only learning one mood and it's going to be indicative. Now mood, and then let me finish, and then it's going to be first person, plural. That would be that one. So with person, you have three options, first, second, or third, right? First, second, or third. And then with number, you have two options. I'll abbreviate, singular or plural. So with present tense, you're going to have a lot of present options. You're going to have a lot of tense options as we get into Greek. Right now, you've only got one. You're only learning one, present. In voice, you're going to have three options, active, middle, passive. In mood, you're going to have four different options later on. Right now, you're just learning one. It's going to be indicative. And then with person, all verbs, you're going to have three options, first, second, or third. And then number, they're asking you, is it singular or is it plural? And then you're going to have the lexical. So when you locate, that's what you're giving. You're giving each of these parameters based on the spelling of the word, okay? Let me talk about mood. So if you're saying, what is mood indicate? So I get tense. Remember, in Greek, tense is kind of action. Okay, so it has a time component. So present is now, and generally speaking, by default, but not always. You're going to find out that tenses, because sometimes you can have a historical present and things like that. So even though it's in the present tense, it's happened in the past. So there are some variations, but generally speaking, for a Greek thinker, when you're an English thinker, you think tense is time. Tense is time, past, present, or future. But that's not the way a Greek thinker is thinking. You got to learn this about Greek. This is your first thing. This is really gonna blow up your understanding of the Greek and your reading interpretation of the Greek New Testament. Okay, if you're a Greek thinker, which the New Testament writers all are, when you put something in, when you decide what tense you're going to put a verb in, what you're thinking primarily is kind of action. What kind of action am I talking about here? So in present tense, we're talking about ongoing or durative, repetitive action. In other words, when they see present, yeah, it has a time component, but that's secondary. What they want to know is what kind of action? Oh, that's durative, present, ongoing kind of action. So the way I would translate a present tense is you could translate it I loose. So if I had luo, I would translate it I loose, or more technically, it's cumbersome, but more technically, I am loosing. Notice the present durative action, not just I loose, but I am loosing. Okay, so that would be tense. Now, voice is. I'll explain each one of these parameters real quick. What voice is it's telling you in terms of the relationship of the subject and the verb. So with active, the subject is doing the action. Bill or I hit the ball. The I is the subject and it's doing the action, hit. Okay? With middle and passive voice, the subject is receiving the action of the verb. And how do we do that in English? We say, I was hit. Notice in the sentence, I was hit by the ball, which is passive, I is still the subject, but it's receiving the action of the verb. Sometimes we draw this out. Let me see. Yeah, I got enough space here. Sometimes you'll see this drawn out like this. If I've got subject, verb, and active, the subject is doing the action. Okay? I hit the ball. In passive, the subject is receiving the action. I was hit by the ball. And then middle passive, we don't use that quite as much. Usually I see it drawn something like this to give it kind of like an image. It's the subject is in middle voice. Let me restate that. In middle voice, the subject is doing the action, but in some sense also receiving the action. And we usually translate that by myself. This is in chapter 3, middle passive, chapter 3. I'll get to that in a second. I was hit, or I am being hit. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Middle would be this. Active would be I hit the ball. Passive would be I was hit by the ball. And middle would be I hit the ball, and we add the word for myself, the phrase for myself. I hit the ball for myself. In other words, middle is this idea that I'm doing the action of the verb, or whatever the subject is. The subject's doing the action of the verb, but receiving some sense of benefit or somehow receiving the action as well. Okay, we don't use it a ton, but that's probably the most unfamiliar to most English speakers. In Greek, you actually have spellings to try to indicate that. That'll become a little bit more important. I'll talk about that in chapter 3. So that's voice. Now, mood, the parameter of mood with the verb system indicates the amount of contingency in a verb. So we do this in English all the time. So I'm in Tampa, and so we'll be watching the Bucks. Whatever your favorite team is. Let's say someone came to you and said, if you came to me and said, "Are the Bucks going to win? Do you think the Bucks are going to win this Sunday?" And I said, "The Bucks are going to win this Sunday." We call that indicative. It has a high degree of probability. I mean, almost certainty. It's a lot of certainty. They will win this Sunday. They are winning. They are going to win. That's now, it could be true, it could be false, but I'm making a claim with no amount of contingency. I'm making a claim that this is going to happen, or they will not win. Again, it could be true, it could be false, but I'm making a claim of very high probability, almost no contingency. This is definite. That's what we call indicative mood. You're going to learn later other kinds of moods in Greek, like subjunctive and optative and imperative, and these other moods have different levels of contingency. So let's say you said, do you think the Bucks are going to win this Sunday? And I said, they might win. Notice, this is not indicative mood. We say things like that when we want to communicate an air of contingency. We're not 100% sure. The probability is lower. It's not as certain. They will win is certain. They might win. They maybe will, and probably they'll win. Probably is a higher contingency than might, but still not 100%. So the way we communicate mood in English is we add, again, auxiliary words like would, should, could, might, probably. In Greek, they change the spelling. They actually have morphology for this, okay, to indicate mood. They don't add auxiliary words. So right now, the mood that you're learning, chapter 2 and 3, is indicative. You'll learn other ones later. And the person, again, is going to be first, second, third, and the number is going to be, is it singular or plural? So those are the parameters. When they ask you to locate, that's what they're asking, and that's what each of those parameters means, okay, in its grammar. So this is all. This is this is the active endings. So if I were to change, let's change this red. In chapter 3, what are you going to learn? You're going to learn all of it's the same stuff in chapter 3. The only thing that's different is basically they're giving you the middle passive endings because Greek does morphology, and so it has a different set of endings in order to indicate middle passive. So let's turn to page 29, and you'll see this. Oh, I forgot the thematic vowel. Now, you'll notice in all of, my board's getting messy here, and something else is going to introduce you to in chapter 3, and that is what we call the thematic, I like to call it a lot of times, the connecting vowel, okay? And this vowel is there in the primary endings, you just don't see it as easily. Oh, this is changing here. You don't see it as easily, the thematic vowel or connecting vowel in the, that's a messy sigma, in the primary endings, but you see it more clearly and they're there, you just see it more clearly in the middle passive, and this is why he kind of introduces it here. Now, these are the middle passive endings, okay? This is an iota. Sometimes my writing gets sloppy. So you have this thematic vowel, and they'll always be in the same place. There's an O, even though this is an eta, there's an epsilon hiding kind of behind that. It gets a little hidden. So O, E, E, O, E, O, and he'll talk about that. They're there in the primary endings. Think about it. O, back in the previous page on, I think it was page 23 or something, Lu O with the omega, there's the O. Lu A, there's the, you see the epsilon. Ace, so O, ace, A. Amen, that not here, but in the primary. Ete, notice the E is in the ete from the primary, from the active endings. And so you have that thematic vowel in the active endings. You just don't see it as readily, but in the middle passive, you see this. Now, think of it, so really what Stevens is trying to tell you here is your real ending is this, my. It's the tie, the E is hiding there. It's the meta, it's the ste, and the untie. That's really your ending. But if you memorize it with a thematic vowel, it's not going to hurt you. That's fine. Just, you know, I tend to memorize them in the primary ending, or in the active endings that way as well. So if you memorize it with the thematic vowel, that's fine. So what is the thematic vowel? Thematic vowel, think of it as a connecting vowel. It's connecting the root word, lu, with the ending, lu, lu amai, okay? And then lu e tai. And the connecting vowel or thematic vowel is like kind of like the one that the glue that's bringing the ending together with the stem. It's kind of providing a nice little coupler. It's helping those two sounds kind of pull together. And so that's what's going on there. Now, the only thing you learn in chapter 3 are these endings. So you've got another paradigm. So if you learn this paradigm, mai e tai meteste untai. Mai e tai meteste untai, right? So if you learn these endings, you'll be able to, when they give you a word, you'll be able to locate it. So let's say I had lu meta, and they said, locate that. Oh, I see this is a present tense stem. Oh, I've memorized my endings. This is the middle passive ending. So I know the voice is going to be middle passive. And if you're wondering, how do I know if it's middle or passive? You only know that in context, okay? Just if you're, when in doubt, go with passive. Most of them are passive, and you go with passive. And context determines whether or not it's middle. I know it's an indicative by the spelling. You haven't learned anything else yet, so it's going to be indicative. And I've learned, if I've got this word, I learned, oh, that's my first person plural ending. And it's from the lexical lu o. Remember, with the active ending, your lexical is always that vocabulary, first person active ending. So in the lexical would be, in this case, and for all of these, lu o with the omega at the end. Okay, so this one here, lu a, would be it would be present middle passive, because it's my middle passive ending, it would be indicative. It's the only thing you've learned right now. It's a second person ending because I've learned my paradigm. So I know that's my second person singular, again, from lexical luo. Okay? So that's the verb system, present, the first principal part, present, active, and middle passive indicative endings. And that's the gist of those chapters. Hopefully that'll help you. I'm just looking through my book. Oh, page 33, before I close out this video, look at page 33. In table 3.3, you're going to see both of these sets of endings right next to each other. So you have the active in one column, oes, omen, ete, usi, and then you have the middle passive, mai, etai, meteste, untai, right there. So what you're learning here in this chapter are those two endings. So you've learned about what parameters are. You learned how to locate, that when they ask you to locate a verb, they're asking you for these parameters to identify from the spelling. What are these parameters? And now you've learned the two major endings, active and middle passive, there in table 3.3 for the present indicative. So that's the gist of those two chapters. Hope that helps.